Welcome to coffee, my little coffee time here. I've got the American Solidarity uh, Party mug. Life, community, environment, and peace. Can we move those from being ideals that we talk about through values that we live into realities in our world? Yes, Karen Lynn, you actually made it on time. How about that? We've got 9 people already: Lillian, Irene, and so on. Sorry if I didn't mention everybody's name. I am going to actually hide right now the comments. Please continue making comments. I do read them. You are going to notice a little bit of shakiness, perhaps some unsteadiness, hopefully minor unsteadiness. I am looking for ways of being just a little bit more flexible, still trying to have a good image to send to you, but my iPhone, which I'm using now, I've reverted to it as of that kind of fiasco with the computer yesterday, even though there are certain controls that the Facebook Live on the computer has that are not found on the iPhone. There are certain controls and things, fun stuff perhaps, that is on the iPhone Facebook Live that is not on the on the computer. It's very strange that the same overall platform, Facebook Live, would be so different when you switch from the iOS operating system on the iPhone to the OS 10 operating system on the MacBook. What can I say? That's life. There are some mysteries that are even impenetrable, and what goes on in that space station-like structure, taking up I don't know how many square blocks it actually occupies. I'd say at least 4, maybe 6 square blocks up in Cupertino. That is the Apple headquarters. It's impenetrable what goes on there. Probably even more impenetrable than what goes on in Washington. I don't know. It can be scary, or it can be an opportunity for us to realize that God may have designs. His designs tend to be to help us to discover ways to rescue ourselves from our own folly. That might be an interesting thought, especially in this day. I won't rehash all the events of today, except for one. There's one that is really, really quite important, and that is today is the summer solstice, the June solstice, the longest day of the year. It takes place today at, let me see if I can get this up here again. I do have the exact time at 2:43 this afternoon. 2:43 this afternoon, Pacific Daylight Time, will be the moment of the summer solstice. That will be the moment when the Earth, rotating on its axis, will be in a position that the North Pole is at its farthest, pointing away from, exactly the opposite. The North Pole will be at its farthest, pointing towards the sun, and the South Pole at its farthest pointing away from the sun, meaning longest day of the year for anybody north of the equator, and shortest day of the year for anybody south of the equator. Australia and Central and Southern Africa are moving into, as well as much of South America, are moving into winter. So it's wintertime down there as it is summertime here. Hopefully in Australia that will mean a reprieve from the dreadful wildfires that they have had this past summer. Remembering that in Australia, summer is when we are experiencing winter up here in the north. So, yeah, we need to realize that we here in the northern hemisphere are not all there is in the world, and perhaps stop judging the rest of the world by ourselves and our interests and our experience. I've been doing some reading and thinking and praying lately, about the coronavirus, COVID-19, particularly as the pandemic is not lessening in the United States, even though we are, perhaps rightly, perhaps with some degree of necessity, we are opening up business somewhat perhaps as usual, hopefully with safeguards. Today's event in Tulsa may say a lot about just the willingness of people to maintain those safeguards. Actually, the fact that it's going on at all is kind of testimony to the willingness of people to maintain safeguards. But I'm not going to go there. Try not to anyway. But in thinking about the relationship of COVID to the renewed awareness and renewed emphasis among very large members, very large proportion of our society to racism and the discrimination and distinctions that victimize people at the expense of others, and that has in the past done so, and quite honestly is continuing to do so. Thinking about that, praying about it, reflecting on it, there is an article in Civiltà Cattolica, which is a Jesuit publication that is probably the clearest lens into the Holy Father and the Holy See and the theology and philosophy and historical consciousness and even sociological consciousness behind the Church today. That means, of course, it's not without controversy and not without considerable rejection from the anti-Francis types who are problematic, to say the least. But then again, they would regard Pope Francis as problematic, to say the least. And so that one I'm going to step aside from, too. But there is an article in there that I've only read half of, but it basically kind of says that our experience, worldwide experience of this pandemic has sort of pulled the veil away from a lot of stuff that is hidden in our world, that has remained hidden in our world because of various sorts of narrow interests, it's pulled away the veil from many of those hidden things and brought them into light. And racism being one of them. Um, the the dominance in our society by certain forces, particularly forces that are based on self-interest and the interplay of self-interest that among the powerful uh, neglects and ignores and puts down the interest of those who are not powerful and prevents them from sharing equally in the opportunities. You know, it's not necessarily that we have to have an equality of outcomes to be sure that everybody has an equal standard of living. I don't think that's human. I don't think that's possible. But on the other hand, we do have to strive for an equality of opportunities so that everybody at least has a chance to make use of the resources of our society, the resources of our world, the resources that enable one individually and as community to achieve. The opportunities, the playing field needs to be leveled. There have been attempts at leveling that playing field that actually succeeded and were opposed and thrown out. Affirmative action is one of those. As imperfect as it was, at least affirmative action sought to level the playing field of opportunity for certain classes of people in certain areas of endeavor, whether it's education or work. It was very imperfect. I think everybody would admit that, but it simply. Some would say it didn't work. Others would say it was thrown out because it did work and was a threat to people who otherwise had privilege. The veil, perhaps, of the privilege of some of us in our world, in our society, has kind of been ripped away. I have myself, I've always thought myself as being pretty normal, pretty humble, pretty pretty ordinary, and not striving for power or possession. But taking a good look at myself, even as a priest, with very, very few, very limited numbers and percentages of persons of color, shall we say, in my religious sort of profession, as a priest, it has made me ask the question, not just why are there fewer, quote, minority vocations, but have minority people, whether they are Black or Hispanic in particular, had greater hoops to jump through in order to get to the position of being ordained. In my day, looking back, I can probably point to some African Americans and some Hispanic people, Mexican origin, of my generation, who were perhaps discouraged by the hoops that the church and the seminary system put them through and therefore they did not have the same advantage that, say, I did in going through that same system. I never realized that, quite frankly. And I'm not going to go into details of the ups and downs of a seminary experience or the seminary system or whatever. If I were to do that, there would be a lot of, shall we say, challengeable subjectivity in my remarks. And I'm sure that in my ramblings there's enough challengeable subjectivity that of the things that I say anyway. But the fact is, it's only pretty recently, and I haven't been an activist in social justice. I have supported activists in social justice. I have tried to create space in my own mind and in my own world for those who did feel called to be more active in issue-oriented things, but that I never quite perceived as my calling, for better or for worse. But I have certainly been favorable towards the movements of social justice and equality in our world, and like I say, tried to perhaps create an atmosphere in which that could be done. I'm being a little bit distracted by my background, and what you are seeing in my background. There is my exercise bike. There is the closed door, fortunately, to my bathroom, and a couple of cardboard boxes and pictures in my dresser. And right behind my head is my bed and the headboard with a light on it. Notice there's no picture hanging over my bed. That's at least one safeguard that I have in case of serious earthquake while I'm in bed. So anyway, and then of course the map of the Roman Empire and lamp and bookcase and couch. Now that's what's behind me. Anyway, having tried to be fairly self-aware for most of my life, and reflecting on my own life and my own experience in relation to my study of scripture and theology and the tradition of faith that we have in the Catholic Church and all of that, trying to bring what sometimes is called theological reflection into my life. I still have to say that I resisted the thought of being in a position of privilege just because of my skin color, and perhaps because of my relatively humble origins as the grandson of German immigrants and the son of their son and daughter migrating from Aberdeen, South Dakota, out here to Southern California in the late 1930s. I came along in 1942. And the late 1930s was a time when, we were still trying to pick our way out of the Depression, and an awful lot of farm families found that they could perhaps make a little better future for themselves and their families by moving from the Midwest to California. And my dad did not have much difficulty getting a job, starting out as a ditch digger with the Southern California Gas Company. And the gas company was an essential service for a growing population. So it was a good field of employment for him. So, I grew up in a pretty much late 40s, early to mid 50s middle class family, middle class environment. So I never thought that was a great deal of privilege, but there were a lot of people at that time who were growing up very, very differently from me. And most of you who are watching with me on this coffee chat, whether right now or later, you've got your own stories to tell. Maybe stories of facing oppression and discrimination of a kind that I never did. My interest in social justice, I have to say now, has been sort of from a distance, from not having experienced it personally, not having experienced injustice personally myself. And I need to have the humility to recognize that. Getting into Jesus now. Because one could say, and that marvelous poem that's found in second chapter of Philippians, where he was in the form of God, but he humbled himself. He didn't cling to the privilege of being God as something to grasp. Jesus himself came down from a very high perch, a perch in which most of us have an image of God as being out there. At best, God is out there or up there showing mercy and compassion to us. In other words, it's a relationship of a remote giver and gifted. God has done good things for me. I don't think that is really an adequate way of looking at God. That's not the way that Jesus presented God to us, even though it is the only natural concept of God that we can possibly come to with our unaided human reason. That God is there and we're here. There is a God. God created the universe. God is distinct from the universe, and he wants the best for us. He wants to reward us. He wants us to be good so that he can reward us and fulfill the creation that he has created. God had something very different in mind, though. Who can understand the mind of God? Well, I'll tell you who can understand the mind of God. Jesus can. Right? And the mind of God may have gone something like this. God, there was something lacking in God. God, as the Almighty Creator, there was something lacking. What was lacking in God was the experience of humankind. The experience of humankind from the inside. He could observe his creation from the outside as the creator, even as one who loves his handiwork, loves his creation, wants the good for us. But that wasn't enough for God. And so God wanted to become like us, not just to be present for us like a friend, God wanted and wants to experience our experience, which the maker cannot do, the designer cannot do. No matter how wonderful a designer's work is, no matter how wonderful a creator's work is, the creator always remains outside of that creation. And although it may have something in it, the image and likeness, any created thing is going to have something of the internal image and likeness of that creator, yes. But God wanted something more, something that he could not give us as his creatures. He wanted not just to be with us, not just to show compassion to us, but to become one with us, to take on the experience of what it means to be human. That's the culmination of our faith in Jesus Christ, to take on God, taking on the experience of what it means to be human. And we know that what we would like to have as the experience of being human is not the actual lived experience of being human. The lived experience of being human is to suffer. The lived experience, in fact, of being human is that we humans have a tendency to make one another suffer. And if we're honest about it, we justify that, our making one another suffer, and we even like it. If there is somebody that we judge as deserving of punishment, as deserving of the suffering that they receive because of their actions, because of whatever, we enjoy that. There is a sense of satisfaction, isn't there, when somebody is, quote, brought to justice for the things that they did. There is always a sense of satisfaction there. So, if God is going to love us from the inside, 9 o'clock, if God is going to love us from the inside, what that means is he's going to have to take on our sufferings. He can't just come and be nice like we would like him to be. He comes to take on our sufferings. Now, that is the difference between sympathy and empathy. The best God of human imagining, including God as often conceived in the Old Testament, including certainly God as conceived in Muslim faith and most others, is that God is infinitely compassionate. God is compassionate to us and wants to reward us. The gospel reveals something radically different. The gospel reveals that this God wants to experience us from the inside. That is the meaning of the incarnation. That is the meaning also, the results of that, the tradition, especially in the East, but also to a great extent in the West, that our salvation is not that we do good and get rewarded, but that we become one with God. That God invites us into God's own inner life, which is why his revelation of the Trinity and the dynamic of self-emptying love that is the nature of the Trinity, and that's, that's found all throughout the Scriptures, but it is particularly articulated by St. John in kind of the culmination of his reflections, in the first, especially the first letter of John, that God is love. Period. That God is love. And how do we respond to a God who is love? By seeking to love in the way that God has revealed God's self. So the culmination of the commandments is not love your neighbor as yourself. That's sort of a bargaining contract, isn't it? But for Jesus to say, to love one another as I have loved you. And I think that the task of Christian spirituality, Christian mysticism, if you will, that our task is to spend our lifetime reflecting on and integrating into our actions what does it mean to love one another as Jesus has loved us. Not because Jesus has loved us, but as he has loved us. We're not just on the receiving end, nor are we on the giving end just by being good or being nice or being favorable towards others or so on. It does mean becoming like him. And then, as I constantly will say also, the corollary of that, the next step, is if we are serious about loving one another as Jesus has loved us, our main job is looking for those. We don't have to look far. Looking for those whom it is difficult and even not natural, that we are not inclined to love. Looking for those who are difficult to love. And then discovering ways to love them. Now, looking for those who are difficult to love, well, that's when Jesus said, love your enemies. That's when he told the story of the Good Samaritan as the answer to the question, who is my neighbor? And how do we love them? That's why the command to forgive as you have been forgiven is so important. Loving in action does not mean doing stuff for the other. Loving in action means building the relationship that then becomes the platform for action. Building the relationship that can only come through recognizing the need to forgive, even if that forgiveness isn't reciprocated. So, empathy, that's what's needed. Empathy. And that may be something to think about today, particularly as we turn on the news and keep looking at just exactly what is happening today. And what is our response? What is our interior response? And then how do we discover ways of putting that into practice, which is not always an easy one. I mentioned yesterday, I think it was, that One of the ways that we have to put that into practice is forming communities. Perhaps forming communities among people who, and associations among people who may not totally share all of our ideas and our perspectives, but who are necessary if we are to broaden and broaden and broaden our perspective, our response in love to our world. Looking for colleagues, but also looking for those who may not be totally in accord with us, but nonetheless we do share some ideals, or at least share a common humanity. So, having said that, I will take a sip out of my American Solidarity cup. I apologize for the fact that I have not yet achieved stability. Well, maybe I should stop that sentence right there. But I have not yet achieved stability in how to mount this camera in a way that is both flexible and agreeable. So, I do keep monitoring my image on it, and I hope that the image that you receive is more or less what I'm seeing, so that I can correct the image as needed. If you have any questions or comments, I will be happy to read them and respond to them. Please note, tomorrow there will not be a coffee time with Father Tom, but there will be Mass. I am scheduled for the 9:30 Mass tomorrow, and as I have done the last few Sundays, I hope to broadcast it live here on Facebook. So that's 9:30 Mass tomorrow, but no coffee time at 8:30. I'll be back on Monday, God willing, with coffee with Father Tom at 8:30. The Mass, the opening up of our chapel has gone very, very well here at Nazareth House. Everybody is beautifully maintaining social distancing and wearing their masks and so on and so forth. There are a few more signs of openness here. For one thing, there still are no confirmed cases of COVID-19 here at Nazareth House, and we keep tabs on that. One of the things that I have observed, and it's been corroborated with the experience of others here over the past 4 months, people are healthier. People are healthier. They're not getting the sniffles. They're not getting any other sorts of respiratory diseases or having other sorts of communicable problems, which is very, very unusual for a place like this. So, the isolation here and the safeguards are actually extending into other areas of health. And I hope that we can maintain a consciousness, particularly in areas like limiting our interaction, distancing ourselves as appropriate, and always in public wearing a mask. Those are things that actually, at this point in time at least, and in this society, not only prevent the contagion of coronavirus, but also keep us healthier by preventing other contagion too. So I hope that we can come out of this with a renewed sense of the need to maintain personal hygiene, especially washing our hands very, very frequently. So at any rate, Things are going well here, even as we are beginning to open up. Still, there's no openness for visitors here, and anybody who leaves other than for a very brief doctor's appointment under controlled conditions, anybody who leaves here who's a resident will have to be tested and or quarantined upon coming back, which is one reason why I haven't gotten out of here in 4 months. But the time is coming. The time is coming, and I'm looking into it. So at any rate, God bless you all. It has been wonderful visiting with you, even virtually in this way. And please leave any comments that you wish. And God bless you and love you. And we'll see you at Mass tomorrow, if you wish, and Monday morning, 8:30. Even if I should inadvertently say 9, that's what, old habits die hard. But it is at 8:30. If I do change it back to 9, I'll give a big fanfare and a lot of warning. It won't be by surprise. So God bless you all. May the Lord bless and keep you, and let his face shine on you and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bye-bye.